We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Styles McKenzie helping you make those rooms sing. Today's style tip: when it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild, like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Arr, fierce. This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
Hey, former Fabilo! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We have an excellent podcast coming up for you as we're going to be joined in a few minutes by Tristan Freeman. He does such great work over on Bustin' Brackets. Take a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. We're going to be chatting with him a lot about the ACC, the top teams out there in the conference, if we might be able to see some of these bubble teams be able to get into the NCAA tournament, unlike in past years where it feels like they've gotten the, shall we say, short end of the stick with that regard, and just a few teams in general that Tristan is feeling bullish/bearish on. We'll also be touching upon the bottom teams in the ACC, if they might be a big rusty anchor for those aforementioned bubble teams in terms of getting into the NCAA tournament. So a great chat coming up here with Tristan, and we're going to be just giving you guys a lot of these two-part chats with the news and notes in college basketball really starting to wind down. And if you listened to the podcast yesterday, you got my Big Sky Conference preview edition. Expect a lot more of those moving forward as we've got 31 conferences to preview, so you're going to get 31 conference preview podcasts by the time the season starts. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter /X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter. So, per usual, please do send these into the timeline. Other ways, find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to on this podcast via that 5-star review. Well, I did not get in any Twitter /X questions today. Everything is powered by EdgeBoost. Over at EdgeBoost, they're making sure that bettors are able to access their funds anytime, anywhere, any place for whatever their hearts desire whenever you go to edgeboost.bet as well. Utilize that promo code of Greg, Greg, on your first deposit. That'll get you a dollar for dollar match of up to $25, and you earn cashback rewards as you utilize EdgeBoost as well. Now let's take a look at what we're getting in the ACC and so much more with Tristan, who he is a great follow over on the old Twitter /X at Oops351. And Tristan, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Greg. Appreciate it.
Always appreciate you, Tristan. One of the hardest workers, as I know this time of year, you're doing such a great job with your preparation. And just where are you at in getting prepared for the upcoming season? Because most of the transfer moves are all done. Now we don't have to just decide, all right, what are we going to be getting out of Team X, Team Y? A lot of these rosters are now set. And now what are some of the big keys in trying to decipher what we're going to get this upcoming season?
Yeah, it's the first off season where we don't have the fifth-year COVID transfers. So the incoming recruiting classes mean a lot. And we've already had some injury situations to deal with Iowa State and Michigan State losing projected rotation pieces. So it's going to be different, but I do think that, there's definitely some teams that have, at least on paper, separated themselves from the rest of the group.
Yep, it certainly has been interesting. And who are some of the teams that you take a look at right now that are separating themselves from the rest of the field? And what are some of the teams that you're just interested in general?
Yeah, well, obviously coming off the historic collective campaign, 14 teams going to the tournament, the SEC still has several Final Four contenders with obviously reigning national champion Florida. And then you have teams like Kentucky and Auburn who did well in the portal. Arkansas, and I think probably the first time in who knows how it's checking, but it'll be the first time in over a decade where John Calipari has a team that returns the most talent in the league because he always loses so many players to the draft. So the fact that he has most return talent, I think that's going to be a storyline to watch considering they have 2 5-star guards joining as well. So obviously the SEC still has plenty of top teams. The Big 12, when you look at Houston, who still returns a ton, Texas Tech, BYU, obviously the number one incoming player, AJ DeBansta, and then, Arizona, Iowa State, and Kansas, who is probably going to be under the radar a bit because people aren't too impressed with how much talent they brought in compared to how much they lost, but they still have Darren Peterson, who may be the number one, quote-unquote guard in the class. Those are probably the top teams I'm going to watch. And then obviously you still have the blue bloods like Duke and UNC, more so Duke with what they have in as teams to watch. Still more the same, but I do think with so much talent leaving the sport, the other teams are going to have a chance to sort of make their own.
Yeah, but I think that Duke is such an interesting team as well because in this day and age, a lot of it is all about transfers. And Duke has brought in a few transfers, but that said, they're looking to the Boozer brothers to really be able to give them quite a bit of something. And the returning pieces from a season ago, as well as they've got a few guys that are back from last year. How do you take a look at that roster? And how big do you think that it was that they did lose out on Cedric Howard as well? Because I do think that that's a little bit of a blow for them, a guy that we should have seen in the first round of the NBA draft when this is up.
Yeah, it looks like, for those who are following their offseason moves, that they were going to have a wing option no matter what. If it wasn't Coward, then, their number two option was Dame Sarr, the European incoming prospect who was linked reportedly with Illinois and Kansas. He's a very talented 6'6" athletic wing, and he's someone that has first-round potential as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if he has a good year. And yeah, Duke didn't necessarily bring in, any impact transfer style part of rotation, but you have another top class. You still bring back players. I think having Isaiah Evans come back for another year could be big. He's a potential breakout player. And then we'll see what happens with guys like, Caleb Foster and again, Evans, as well as Patrick Ngamba, who the former five-star guy, he's likely going to start him or Malik Brown, but he's going to be a breakout player to watch too.
Yep, they certainly are going to be. I'm so glad that you bring up Evans, a guy who just really did a good job of being able to sink threes. We'll see if he's able to just make his game a little bit more advanced in general, as it felt like he was a one-trick pony last year, but that one trick was very good. As joining me on the show, we do have one of our good friends, Tristan Freeman, who does such amazing work over at Bus and Brackets, joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I'm so glad that you mentioned North Carolina, because I do think that they're one of the more fascinating teams for this upcoming season, because last year that was just not the North Carolina that we all know and love. And by that I mean they just got away from their identity, just not a lot down low. Typically when North Carolina's at its best, we know that Armando Bacot was there for forever and a half, but typically they're doing a nice job hitting the glass, they're doing a nice job of being able to pull in those rebounds. And I think that was really big for North Carolina, that they brought in some front court help and they were able to do a nice job of being able to mix and match with the likes of Henry Vassar and company.
Yeah, obviously everyone who watched last season knows that UNC was incredibly guard heavy, with arguably their five best players all being guards. They do bring back Seth Trimble, who was a double-digit scorer for them. And we'll see what Kyan Evans, the Colorado State transfer, who's going to be running point, do as well. But they're much more balanced in the front court, at least on paper, with as you mentioned, Vassar, the Arizona transfer. James Stevenson's a former five-star prospect at Alabama. Then Caleb Wilson is a consensus five-star incoming player as a freshman, and I think the team will go as he goes. If he has a big year, contends named for ACC Player of the Year, they'll be fine. But if he's, solid, I think the team will have another, good but not great year.
Yep, and I think that there's so much of intrigue out there in an ACC where I think that we're both in agreement. Duke is that team to beat once again this season, but I think that the race for number two might be a little bit more interesting because I look at what Louisville's been able to do. I'm very impressed by what they were able to do in season number one. I think that they could be in for some even bigger things in season number two.
They bring in arguably two of the safest top-tier transfers in Ryan Conwell and then the guy already used to the ACC, Isaac Neely, got double-digit scores, who shot 40% from deep. Those are as good options as you can get. And then Adrian Woolley, who was an 18-point-per-game guy at Kennesaw State, who also averaged over 40% from deep. He'll be an impact player as well. It'll come down with Louisville how good, Mikael Brown is, because he's the only true two-point guard on the roster. So if he struggles, then it's going to be hard to, have another ball handler that can be effective if you're going to compete for an ACC title. And then we're also waiting on, Ali Khalifa's situation where he's currently not eligible to play, and they're, I guess, suing or appealing. So if he's not able to get in, then they're going to be relying on a recovering Keyshawn Pryor, as well as several incoming international players to fit the bill. They're perfectly fine at wing, but there's still some unknowns at the PG in the front court situation for him.
Yep, and I think that that's very well said by you about that as well. And I do want to go back to something that you were talking about with regards to North Carolina a minute ago with them having a few question marks with regards to that backcourt aside from Seth Trimble, and that's because they did lose Ellie Cadeau in the offseason as well. And one team I do feel really bullish about for this upcoming season, we'll talk a little bit more ACC in a minute or two, but that said, that's Michigan because they do bring in Cadeau. Even though he's not necessarily a guy that's going to pop it and lock it from three-point range, not necessarily the world's greatest shooter, what Michigan was missing last year was just a steady hand at the point guard spot. They turned the ball over too much. I think that Cadeau is actually going to be a really good fit for a Michigan team that they could have used someone like him last year.
Yeah, I mean, their de facto point guard is Danny Wolf, the Yale transfer. So they really need a point guard on this team. And I think having him paired with, the likes of Roddy Gale and, obviously the UAB transfer, Yaxel Lendenborg, I do think that they're going to be a more balanced team as well. But Cadeau as a lead guard, he had his ups and downs because he's not necessarily a guy who's looking to score. So while the passing will help, they're going to need him to shoot some as well. Otherwise, the spacing could be a concern for them.
Yeah, but I think that you mentioned something so good on the spacing as well, because that is a little bit of a key with this Michigan offense as well, allowing these guys who are such creators to be able to, for lack of a better term, create. As joining me on the show, we do have one of our good friends in Tristan Freeman joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I think that this is a great stopping point for part one and go into part two, where I want to talk about how some of these ACC schools that have been on the bubble in past years have just been killed by these teams who have been so bad that have been dragging down the conference. I want to look at more of these mid-tier teams in the ACC and just a few teams in general that Tristan is feeling bullish and bearish on for the upcoming season. That comes up next right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the Beast and Family Podcast.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Styles McKenzie helping you make those rooms sing. Today's style tip: when it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild, like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Arr, fierce. This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to have Tristan Freeman aboard. He does such great work over at Bustin' Brackets. Taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. You're able to follow him on Twitter/X at HoopsOn351. And Tristan, we were leaving off talking about this ACC conference, and I want to bring this up because we have mentioned this quite a few times on this podcast. You have joined me over the years, and I'm always appreciative of it. But we know what the top teams in the ACC bring, but it feels like those bubble teams always get killed by how bad the bottom of the conference has been. We have seen that over the last few years, and I want to get your thoughts here as to if you think that there might be a little bit of improvement for the bottom of the league, or if we might be back to the same old, because I look at Boston College. They haven't been able to do a lot this offseason. I do feel like there might be a little bit of positivity for a school like Cal. I do think that eventually they're going to be able to get it all figured out. I think that they're trying to rebuild that in the right way, but there are still quite a few concerns with regards to this conference in general. And some of these bottom teams, I'm even looking at a team like a Georgia Tech, might be causing some of these teams that might be on the cusp of the NCAA tournament to be left off when it's all said and done on Selection Sunday.
Yeah, the thing with the ACC is just they have to do better collectively in a non-con. Like whether or not they're going to be good against each other, we don't know. Obviously, I think the big concern is Cal and Stanford being good enough, but also teams are going to have to go on the road. And we saw a few times where teams tripped up against them and suffered, what will be considered bad losses. So those two teams I'm definitely looking at. And the strength is going to come from the projected middle. I mean, how is Miami going to do in Jai Lucas's first year? Wake Forest and Virginia Tech teams that could go up and down. SMU is a team that has the talent, but will they get the marquee wins? Same with NC State with Will Wade. How good will they be in year one? I think the teams that you feel safest about is Duke and Louisville. Everyone else, you can make a case for that can be the third best team, or they could be a team that's on the bubble, and that's going to be a concern because other leagues such as the Big Ten, Big 12, and SEC, you feel pretty good there's going to be at least 6 tournament teams. And right now, the ACC is like you think you can get 3 to 5, but are there more than that? You don't know.
And I think one of the big keys is SMU. SMU is going to be returning over 50% of their minutes from a season ago. And I look at this bunch, I felt like they underachieved a little bit last season, but still, with the fact that they bring back quite a bit from a season ago, I feel like they made some okay moves here in the transfer portal as well. I think that that's going to be really big for this conference, and SMU has been really a nice find for them because, I mean, the other teams that they brought over from the West Coast have not really added a lot of zing, and SMU, out of those teams that they expanded to be able to welcome in, has been by far the most effective team for them.
Yeah, SMU at times looked like a tournament team, and then there was other times where they just got blown out every time they faced a decent opponent, and that's what ultimately doomed them. But as you mentioned, they bring back Kevin Boopy Miller, they bring back BJ Edwards, they bring back the big man Semet Yetojilu, who could be a breakout candidate. And it'll be interesting, Jaron Pierre, the 20-point per game scorer and transfer, he's from Jacksonville State. He's going to be someone that if he has a good year for them, then they can be a tournament team. But if he's one of those transfers who's just okay or doesn't able to have his score and translate moving up, then they're going to be in trouble. And I'm also very interested in whether or not they're going to defend. The scoring wasn't an issue for them with 6 guys averaging around double figures. It was just the fact that against good teams, they just weren't able to stop anything. And if that doesn't change, they'll be in the same spot.
Yep, I am so with you on SMU with that regard. If they can just play a little bit of better defense, because honestly, they were a pretty solid team on the glass last year as well. Recognize that they lose some of those low post pieces, but they were able to do a rock solid job with that regard. I think that that'll be key for them. As joining me here on the show, we do have one of our good friends, Tristan Freeman, on Coast to Coast Hoops, and I think that Virginia is just an interesting team as well. As we know, Coach Odom, he knocked off Virginia when he was over at when he was over at UMBC for the first ever 1/16 upset. Now he's at the control of this team, but I just really like what they've done in the offseason, being able to bring in someone like a Malik Thomas, who is a 19-plus point per game scorer over at San Francisco, way that he's been able to mix and match, bring in a lot of guards, and feels like this should be a team that plays an exciting brand of basketball, has a lot of guys who are able to bomb it from the outside, and won't be dead last in the country in terms of total possessions per game. I think that the arrow is just really trending up for this Virginia team.
Yeah, I think on the positive side, you bring in a bunch of talented guards. Down Hall was a starter at BYU. Sam Lewis, Jakari White, and Malik Thomas were all, 15 point per game plus scorers at the lower levels from the high majors. And even if just one of them has a big year, they'll be fine in the backcourt. The front court is a little bit of a question mark because the only, even if you, place Devin Tillis as a sort of an undersized 4, Ugonna Yenzo is the only D1 talent that has experience there, and he struggled in college at Kentucky and Kansas State. So if he has big minutes, it could be a concern because he didn't play much at Kansas State and they weren't even good. So it'll be interesting to see if the newcomers in the front court has a big year for them, but it could be a very guard-heavy team for Ryan Odom in year one. And it worked at VCU the past couple of years because he had elite guards, but those were arguably some of the best players in the A10. Will guys like Thomas and Lewis and Hall be some of the best players in the ACC? That's the big difference.
Yep, I think that is so key, and I'm glad that you mentioned that. I do have quite a bit of faith in Hall. We saw what he was able to do over at BYU last season, a very high level of competition, but whether or not Malik Thomas is going to be able to translate up, I feel like that's a little bit of a question mark, and I feel like there's a lot of people that are questioning this team because they just lose so much from a season ago, but I do look at Clemson as well out there in the ACC, and I just feel a little bit better about Brad Brownell over the last few seasons. We've seen the way that he's been able to mix and match. We've seen the way that he's been able to do such a tremendous job of being able to bring back all these guys. Now, very interesting that Ian Shefflin apparently is going to be playing football this season. I didn't necessarily have that one on my bingo card, but that said, with this Clemson team, the way that they've been able to revamp things with bringing in RJ Godfrey for a second time, Nick Davidson, I think is going to translate relatively well. Carter Walling, guys like this, it's very clear that they were looking a little bit more to the front court and be able to man things down low, have a few question marks with regards to the backcourt, but I do think that they did a really good job of being able to find some nice 6'7", 6'8" versatile pieces that are going to be able to play some really good defense with Walling coming in from Utah Valley, a guy that I really like.
Yeah, I think Well and Davidson will work pretty well together in the front court, replacing, guys like Middlebrooks and Shefflin and PJ Hall of the past. But as you mentioned, the backcourt, you lose Chase Hunter. Is Ephraim Bubba Johnson going to be good enough? Will Dylan Hunter have a breakout campaign? Is Justin Porter, another transfer, good enough? That's the concern. But honestly, there's like several teams where you could argue that there's backcourt concerns if you want to mention, Georgia Tech, Pittsburgh, Wake Forest, other teams that could have solid front courts, but you have questions in the back court. That's going to be the question for not just Clemson, but for many teams in the conference. Will they be good enough to contend for a postseason?
Yep, I think that's a big question mark, but I do have a little bit more faith in Brad Brownell than I had just a few short years ago. And I know that you, Tristan, are doing such a great job of being able to evaluate a little bit of everything in college basketball. We've talked a lot about the ACC, but I know you're doing a great job covering it also. I do want to branch out a little bit more here. Is there a team or two that you've just been researching this offseason that you feel like the folks out there that are covering this sport, the public in general, are sleeping on a little bit, and you just feel a little bit higher about them than most?
I think because they don't use the transfer portal, the Marquette Golden Eagles are going to be a team that people think will take a step back. And obviously, when you lose the players that they did, including Cam Jones, and you didn't really replace them, then it's like, hey, this is going to be the year that Marquette takes a big enough step backward on the bubble. But, Shaka Smart just keeps having guys who are role players, step up into bigger roles. And I think Chase Ross is going to be someone who's going to be an all-league caliber player as the next lead guard for them. And then, guys like Trey Norman and Zate Lowry are going to get bigger roles as well. Ben Gold in the front court, Royce Parham as well without David Joplin around. And then who knows what they'll get out of the freshman class. I like Nigel James and Adrian Stevens, their incoming guards. I think Marquette's going to be a team that may not be top 25 for some folks, but eventually they'll be there at some portions next season.
Yeah, with Marquette, there's such an interesting wild card in a Big East where it feels like it's at a little bit of a crossroads right now. UConn should certainly be that top team in the Big East this season. Xavier really revamped their roster. Creighton has been a team that has been a very steady Eddie team over the last few seasons. And with Marquette, to your point, really the lone guy that they brought in by the transfer portal was Tyler Kolek. That very much worked out for them, but what are they going to be able to get out of a lot of those guards that are going to need to take a little bit of step forward without Cam Jones being out of the fold? That's going to be a fun team to watch, and I know that you, Tristan, are doing a great job of looking at all things college basketball. You're locked in, getting set for this upcoming college basketball season, so let the good people at home know what's on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, you can follow me at Hoopsnut351 on Twitter/X, and then also just follow at Bustin' Brackets, my main site for the latest college basketball news. We'll be working on NBA draft stuff these upcoming few days, and then we'll be just analyzing what's happening in the offseason before you know it, we'll be previewing the 2025-2026 campaign.
Absolutely. And Tristan, he has been so superb at taking a look at this game of basketball all 12 months out of the year, every single year. He's doing a great job of being able to lock in, take a look at what we're getting. So a big thanks to Tristan for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family podcast. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, name does not matter, so per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire on whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I'm coming at you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. Always appreciative of all these great guests that join me on the podcast all throughout the offseason. As Tristan, he's putting in that great work, so a big thanks to him, and I will continue to put in that work every single day for you guys, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Styles McKenzie helping you make those rooms sing. Today's style tip: when it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild, like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Arr, fierce. This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.